And you weren't there on day one at Channel 4, but you were certainly there in the early days.
A couple of years later, 1951.
And let's talk about the good old days, as they say in broadcasting.
Right.
Well, how did you end up at Channel 4 in 1951?
I worked in a radio station in Gainesville because I went to the University of Florida down there. And one of the people I met in radio down there had come up here and was employed at Channel 4 or WMBR TV. And he came down for a football game and bumped into me one day and said, they need a photographer. And he knew I dabbled in shooting pictures and developing my own film. And so why don't you come up and try? And so I came up here, and it turned out they didn't need a photographer. What they needed was a cameraman. And that sounded good to me, because so I applied for the job and said, well, we'll see. And I went back to Gainesville, and they called and said, come on up.
And you had learned to be a cameraman.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. That was completely different. That was, you know, that was a roll-around huge camera. And
and needless to say, although we should remind everyone, this was live TV.
Oh,
there was nothing else.
That's right. Oh, there was film, of course.
Yeah.
Back at the film filled in the holes that weren't live, and a little bit of cable. When I got there, there was a cable, but it was everything you did was live. There was no videotape, for instance. That's the big difference.
Came much later.
Much later.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you had a commercial, you did it live.
So live TV is a special kind of thing that anybody who's ever had experience with it knows. If you make a mistake, that's just it.
That's right.
There's no going back and doing it over.
That's why you rehearsed a lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot of rehearsal.
Now, other people that we've talked to in this oral history project have said mighty nice things about you and your abilities as a director, which came a little later. You started out as a cameraman.
Right.
And but talking about rehearsing, you did. The director did a lot of rehearsing because you had to know where the cameras were going to be and where the talent was going to be.
Everybody needed to know where they were going to be, what they were going to do when push came to shove, when you finally went on the air, when you clicked out there. Otherwise, the mistakes go out and you're not getting them back. And so there was a good deal of rehearsal. Yeah, there was.
And you, as the director, were kind of choreographing all of this.
That's right. Yeah. That's right, yeah.
And you had to know where everybody was going to be, and everybody had to be where they were supposed to be, which wasn't always true, I guess.
That's right. No, that's true. They weren't always there. But anyway, starting at 7:30, we'd usually have a half-hour show, and that could be anything from a quiz show to a hillbilly show, depending on what night you were on.
A local quiz show.
Oh, yeah, local quiz show, and you had to set chairs for audience. It was between shows was quite something to see people dashing around, tearing down sets, putting up things and what. You only had 15 minutes usually to do it.
And people now may have a hard time appreciating just how fascinated people were with this new thing called television. People did want to come and see. You had no trouble, I bet, getting a studio audience.
Yes, no, that's right. They wanted to come and see what was going on, and and they were piled up. Well, we had to limit it to 75, I think, to get them in there and everything. But we were developing stars. They wanted to come see Dick Stratton, and they wanted to come see Virginia Adder, so it was popular. Yeah.
And a lot of country and western music shows.
That was our big one, I think, to start with.
Toby Dowdy.
Toby Dowdy, right. And they would roll into town on let's say a Thursday afternoon, and we'd rehearse until 5 or 5:30, And then everybody would disappear and come back at 7 and 7:30, whatever, and do the show, and all live.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was
Including the commercials, which were also live, right?
right.
Which also required some rehearsing, I guess.
Right, and of course, whoever, Bill Cook or somebody had written the commercials for Toby, he'd have to learn those.
Mm-hmm.
He knew his songs and everything, and he'd select what songs they were going to run and whatnot. But the commercials, he'd have to go over and look. And they had cue sheets to help them, but no teleprompter. These were just, you'd scribble out in large print what the commercial, said, and he could read it, hold it up beside the camera.
Yeah.
He could read it.
On the spur of the moment, you may not recall any, but there must have been some colossal bloopers, as we say, mistakes that were unavoidable because it was live television. But does anything come to mind?
Well, I don't know. I remember that Jenny had a show that Tommy Carroll was a singer in a show that Jenny had, a 15-minute show, and at one point he was singing "My Buddy," I think, and we had him in a foxhole, and he had, in transitioning from the previous song, gotten into the foxhole, got his helmet on and everything, and was starting to sing "My Buddy" and whatnot. And then we looked at him. He had his bow tie was on, in his army jacket, and his bow tie was showing through.
Yeah.
But there were lots and lots of errors that occurred.
And I know viewers were fascinated with this new thing, television. They couldn't get enough of it. It's probably not too much of a stretch to tell people that they were watching the test pattern. They were so fascinated to see this new thing called television. Well, what was it like to be on the other end of that, at the TV station, and realize that you were doing this brand new thing, that kind of inventing something new?
Well, it was great, I guess. I mean, you did feel like you were trying to come up with new gimmicks. You could see what the network was doing every now and then when they did the news, or when you watch a network show and you think, well, how'd they do that? And then you try to emulate it or somehow do something like it, and then that would cause you to even to do something hadn't been done before at all. I know I was constantly asking for low-key lighting. That would be lighting where you couldn't see anything beyond. Just put the spot on the man, just put the spot on my person. And the engineers didn't like that because it made a halo effect around, and they didn't like to send out a halo effect. But little by little, we developed a method of putting low-key lighting on somebody, and without developing the halo and whatnot. But
So you were interested in experimenting?
yes, definitely, yeah.
And,
but we did a lot of, I think a lot of our innovations came in set building to start with. Can we make it look like a beach?
Right.
And how do we go about making it look like a beach, and and things like that. And we did some pretty elaborate sets. We had people in boats and with water reflection underneath to make it look like they were actually out in a boat. And the rear screen would throw a picture up of trees, and then have somebody rock the boat so that it gave it the whole thing. And then
and it all had to be done in the studio.
You got it.
So there was WMBR, FM and AM, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then along came in 1949, September 1949, television.
Right.
And I think maybe a lot of people, including the owners of the radio station, didn't recognize what television was going to become.
I don't think so. I think they putting all their money into FM. They thought FM was it, and paid but very little attention to it, and to the TV. Because when they first got the TV license, they got a couple of TV cameras, used ones, and they would just put them in the radio studios, and they'd sit there until they'd go out and do a broadcast. They had a remote truck, and they had these two cameras, and their early forays into telecasting were to take the remote truck out to some place, and like May Cohen's or something, and do a show. I don't know what kind of shows they did because I wasn't there then, but it would only last for an hour. Then they'd pack up, bring it back, and put the cameras away in the studio, and I don't know where they parked the truck someplace, and then wait to see how many people had actually seen that telecast. Probably 10, you know.
Yeah.
But they eventually sold enough sets to know that they had to move to another place because they're going to do more extensive programming.
They had to have a place for a TV station.
Yeah, because they were going to start now trying to program 2 or 3 hours a day in the morning, or in the morning 2 or 3 hours, and 2 and 3 hours in the afternoon.
And
the rest of the time was test pattern.
Contrasted to today's 24-hour broadcast day, there were just a few hours of television.
In those early
days. In the early days.
Yeah. By the time I got there, though, however, they were in 1951. They were going from 7 in the morning until 11 at night, off and on. I mean, you know, the live part of it.
Now, this was the only TV station in Jacksonville.
Right.
And I guess, I think they had a choice of any network programming they wanted to air. They didn't have to be affiliated with just one network.
That's right. They had 4 different networks coming down, and NBC, ABC, Dumont, and CBS. Though the radio station was CBS, a big affiliate of CBS, a strong affiliate. And so I'm sure we leaned toward CBS as far as what we took on the cable. But it was a single cable at first, and it came out of Charlotte, and it went through, I think, Savannah, and through us, and then to Miami. And so those 4 managers would have to get together every so often and decide what programs were going to come down that cable.
So all those stations had to agree that they wanted the ABC or the CBS show
on this particular time.
Very
or
interesting.
So, yeah. Of course, there were some big shows on NBC, Comedy Hour, and things of that nature. And
now, the early mission of Channel 4 in 1949, when they signed on, and still after you came, I guess, they were still trying to sell TV sets.
Right.
So that because when there was no reason for anybody to own a TV set until there was a TV station.
Right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So most of our broadcasting was our commercials were to push TV sets, you know, and no, that's right. I don't know. I think that the stimulus for people to buy TV sets might have come with the Kefauver hearings, when they looked into organized crime.
Right.
And it was live, and you had these guys on the stand, these mafia fellows and whatnot. And
early 50s.
With the early 50s, and people were seeing it. They were in either their friends' homes, or they were seeing it in TV sets used to be left on in department store windows. People would stand out and see that, and I think that was something that made people want to have a TV set at home. They were interested in that.
Yeah.
Of course, sports things too would cause people to buy.
But a lot of people did gather outside department store windows and watch, and they would have a speaker outside. So
and I imagine TV sets were expensive.
Yeah.
For instance, I didn't have
Relatively.
one. Yeah, I mean, hardly anybody in the station had one. And then Madman Muntz came along he started to break the
This was
in the early 51.
a local merchant?
Munch TV, no,
Oh.
Munch TV, and
Okay.
they were the first ones to kind of break the price thing.
I see.
But the engineers put the sets down as well. It was hardly anything, but they got a picture, and they were cheaper than RCA's and other people's. So as the sets came down, people bought them, and we began to get an audience.
In those early days, there wasn't much news, particularly local news.
Right,
It was pretty basic.
right. It was rip and read like radio. You know, so much of our stuff came from radio.
From the wire services.
Yeah, the wire services, right. And then Bill Grove actually came to us as an announcer, and he got assigned once to do the news, and doing the news was ripping it off the machine, coming out and sitting behind a desk and doing it. And I'm sure he got the idea we can do better than this. And he started a news department at about 1955 or so, he talked him into getting a fax machine so we would get pictures on the wire, and as well as stories, and we could talk a photographer into. We didn't have news photographers, so he had a station photographer who took still pictures and did have a camera. But he could talk him into taking the camera out and shooting fires or whatever, local news, and come back and put that on the air. And little by little, the 5-minute newscast developed into more than just reading the news.
And Bill Grove was a teacher. He didn't have any training or anything that would necessarily make you think he was going to be this newsman, anchorman.
Except he'd been a broadcaster. He'd been an announcer for quite a bit of time. And
but there were a lot of announcers who didn't have whatever he had that developed into being a real news director.
That's right. I don't know how he did it, but
just one of those things.
That's right. Yeah. And had the ability also to talk the management into spending money to get this and that and the other.
And I guess management, and by management we would at that time be referring to Glenn Marshall, was generally supportive of efforts to develop a news department.
I guess they must have been. Yeah, but I think also the fact that you could get sponsors, that people, you know, I mean, they liked Bill Grove. He looked good, he sounded good, and he was doing a hell of a good job. And so I think they had people lined up, maybe even to want to sponsor his program. And of course, that make management be more willing to support him. And it wasn't until later on, I think, that management really had to come to his support.
When
he started delving, when he started stepping on some toes with stories that involved even sponsors.
Because that was not an issue in the early days.
No.
But once they got into investigative reporting and editorializing,
that's right.
Then there were going to be some people who were going to be upset.
That's right. Yeah.
And he backed the news department.
Right. And they're really crucial. And these were good friends of Mr. Marshall too, because they would. Well, for instance, the city had a system of passing around who they'd buy their cars from one dealership to another without any bids or anything. And so we got in there and criticized it because they should be going for the lowest bidder and whatnot. Well, the people who had just received the contract to provide automobiles, the owner is a good friend of Mr. Marshall's, and his toe is getting stepped on because it looks like now this contract's going to be canceled, and it's going to force it into an open bid and whatnot. So he complains. But this marshal stood up to that sort of thing.
They were members of the Chamber of Commerce and
Precisely.
so forth,
And they're probably
and Rotary
good
Club,
bosom buddies,
etc.
may have even golfed together, you know.
Well, that's what Norm Davis said, that
Yeah,
you know, because he did editorials that stepped on some toes, and he said Glenn Marshall backed him even when it came to Mayor Hayden Burns coming in and giving him hell.
That's right. Yeah.
And now, in your later years at the station, and you were at Channel 4 almost 40 years.
Yeah, 39 years, yeah.
You became more and more involved with the news.
Right, yes, yeah. There was a time when Grove decided that he needed a director who was who directed the newscasts, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Because before that, I was doing hillbilly shows and everything, or doing all sorts of shows, and directing the newscast was just incidental. You'd, you know, with 6 o'clock, it's time for me to go direct the newscast. Mm-hmm. 7 o'clock, I've got a hillbilly show. 8 o'clock, I may have something else. So he wanted somebody who was dedicated to just doing the newscast at 6 and the newscast at 11.
There came a time as the news department evolved and videotape and so forth that Channel 4, I think technology may have helped with this, became a dominant force in journalism, investigative reporting, editorials, etc.,
right.
Under the leadership of Bill Grove and Norm Davis.
Right, precisely. They used, they went after what they considered to be corruption in the government, I think, as in the city government and whatnot, and by putting on putting investigative reporters on the job and putting series on. You do a series during the week, 3 minutes on Monday and 3 minutes on Tuesday and 3 minutes on Wednesday, followed up with editorials on the subject, and put the heat on whoever was corrupt at the time.
And lots of documentaries.
Right.
Project 4 documentaries.
Norm is really something else. Now, Norm, intellectual, and what a busy bee, because he did the editorials, he did the documentaries, and he conferred with Grove and guided so much. I don't know how he did it, but he's really some guy. And
they did documentaries on all kinds of things, and frequent documentaries.
I bet you once a month almost.
Yeah.
You know, it was amazing. It was really amazing how he could stand up under all that load.
And they got results.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think we have to say we wouldn't enjoy consolidated government if it weren't for Norm Davis and Bill Grove and those early investigative reporting efforts of Channel 4.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's true. I think that's right. That they showed there was so much wrong with the way our city government was formed. It was put together. We had two different bodies. We had a commission and we had a council, and they were often at odds with each other. And
there was the famous Government by Gaslight documentary.
Well, yeah, there was another one of Norm's things, right? It was great, and that showed the duplicity of the whole thing, and I think it had a lot to do with bringing consolidation to. I don't know how to convey the difference in not having any videotape and things being live, and having the way it was, and the rehearsals, and then the politicals and the politicians coming over and doing their thing, all live, and making the mistakes and not knowing where to look, and I don't know.
And the fascination with this new medium, people were just literally glued to the set.
Well, no.
And So you told me once, you know, the things that would be done to fill up time. If you didn't have any programming, you once told me that you would just push the camera around the studio.
Oh,
the empty
oh
studio.
yeah, right. That was to fill the time in the morning when the network would. Well, first of all, we'd fill the time. They gave us little 5-minute breaks that had to be done locally. We had to go on the air. So all I'd do is I was on camera at the time, and I'd just push the camera around the studio, and we'd have maybe a bulletin board that I'd pan, and then I'd push the camera out the back door, and we'd look at people going by and going to work. But that seemed to entertain people at home.
People were watching, right?
They were watching.
Yeah.
That's right.
But there would be no audio or anything particularly.
Well, I imagine they were playing music,
Oh, okay.
but I really don't. I don't know. I don't know that. There was no announcer back there
Yeah.
covering.
So this was just basically filling some time.
That's filling,
And
and
it was a little more interesting than the test pattern.
yeah, that's right. And filling time was we had the cable in the afternoon, and sometimes the cable would get cut. I don't know, up
Somewhere between here and
somewhere
New York
between
City.
here and Charlotte. And
Yeah, okay.
all of a sudden, you didn't have the cable, and they call in people. We had music. We had musicians. They'd call in the piano player. They'd call in Ginny. They'd call in a couple of announcers, and for whatever time it took, these people would stall playing music, playing songs, trying to tell jokes, and then as people arrived, like Dick Stratton would arrive in the middle of the afternoon, pull him out there, and it was a different kind of world, and you had to keep going. They had to keep on going. There was no.
They wanted to be on the air, and there was nothing coming down the cable.
That's right, and they're probably calling the film and department saying, find a film and that we can put, and if they found anything, it would probably be wrestling, because we filled a lot of time with wrestling films.
Wrestling was big. Yeah.
Yeah.